Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Daily Energy Markets podcast. It is the 26th of June, Thursday, the 26th of June, and it feels like it is the end of the week here in the UAE, at least, and across much of the region for Islamic New Year holiday tomorrow. It feels like a week that lasted a year, and in all of that, we finish at least the Middle East week or the Gulf week at $68.11 on Brent, up ever so slightly this morning. The big drop that we've seen in the last few trading days has kind of taken a time out as the kind of geopolitical noisiness has resurfaced. Let's kick off this morning with Lori Hatayan, MENA Director at Natural Resource Governance Institute. Lori, your thoughts on the outlook for the sort of ceasefire, let's call it that. What do you call it? What we've seen between Iran and Israel, the war, the shooting has stopped. Is the war over?
Wow, first of all, thank God we survived a possible nuclear war. I wouldn't have thought so, that I will live to see these days, but we survived another catastrophe. Basically, just to quote the President Trump, he said that yes, it could be over, but yes, they could again go back and fight. So basically, no one knew that there was a ceasefire that was being worked around the text, or if there is a text around the ceasefire, or what are the terms of the ceasefire, the way that, for instance, Israel was working with Hamas through the mediators in Qatar. And then we were at the peak. We thought we were at the peak of the fight between Americans attacking nuclear facilities and Iranians deciding that they will retaliate, they cannot not retaliate. And suddenly, after Qatar, we hear that there is a ceasefire, immediate ceasefire, that we don't know the terms. Basically, they all stopped, and now we don't even know what is coming next. We all know that everyone, like the Americans, are meeting with the Iranians, and to discuss what? Before these attacks, before 12, 13 days, that the Americans and the Iranians were meeting to discuss the nuclear, if Iran is allowed for any sort of nuclear activities or not. So now, if the nuclear is out of the picture, what is Iran and the Americans are going to discuss? Is it the future of Iran in this new Middle East? And you've seen, I guess, this whole picture in Israel about the new leaders and the new Middle East picture. So is it how to integrate Iran into the bigger scheme and the bigger picture of what's happening and bring it back into the international community, bring it back to do trade legitimately, openly, or not? So it could be that could be one direction to go through, how to integrate Iran into the new Middle East, especially that, again, to quote the President Trump, he said, we're not after their oil. If China wants to buy the Iranian oil, let them buy. He said that Iran needs the revenues from the oil because they need to build their great country. It's destroyed. So all of that are signs that there might be that we might be surprised that when they go to meet again, they might be talking about this Iranian integration into the new Middle East instead of talking about nuclear facilities and nuclear activities. Again, this is crazy times. I'm sure no one was expecting to see whatever we've seen and witnessed, but that could be maybe my hopeful side this morning, to see a peaceful Middle East.
Bill Spindle, a senior global correspondent at Cipher News, based out of Washington. Bill, what is the perspective from that side of the pond, so to speak? The idea that is this a pause in this is a conflict that has been going on, I mean, obviously for many years, proxy-wise, etc. But this direct engagement between Israel and Iran obviously started last year. We had two events last year, although in some sense they seemed choreographed. And pass very quickly. Now we've had a kind of a full-on offload over the last 2 weeks. From an American point of view, obviously joining this fight, is this a pause? Does it feel like, do you think it's a real ceasefire? Because we don't have any Security Council present here. We don't have anybody except Donald Trump sort of banging on the table and saying this is a ceasefire.
Yeah, I think Donald Trump would obviously like to have this be a one-off bombing and see a ceasefire that would hold and peace break out across the region. I do think, though, that it's pretty fragile at this point. There's still a race on to find some 400 kilograms of highly enriched uranium that the Iranians had, and the IEA confirmed. If that is located, it's hard to believe the Israelis would hold back from another bombing run to try to take it out if they thought they could do that. There are other.
Is that with some assumption that it's not buried under the biggest bombing in the world under this Fordo mountain?
I think it's pretty hard to determine that from outside Iran. Even at this stage, it's hard to, possibly Iranians have made it down into that facility to try to determine what kind of damage is there. And possibly the Israelis have enough intel sources to get a handle on whatever it is they find. But it's hard to believe even that's there's a lot of evidence that, or at least some evidence that those 400 kilograms were moved prior to it. And then after that, you're going to have longer term concerns that, the Israelis, do they have, or the Iranians, do they have some sort of ability to convert highly enriched uranium in other secret facilities that were perhaps smaller and not discovered? Are they then able to convert that into a weaponized sort of gas form that they need to turn it into an actual weapon? That's what was taking place in Isfahan. Those facilities do seem to be pretty thoroughly destroyed, but that doesn't mean they don't have smaller facilities elsewhere. 400 kilograms of highly enriched uranium, 60%, is 8 or 9 bombs, and it doesn't take that much more to turn it into something. If you still have some facility left, it's hard for me to believe the Israelis, were they to discover facilities like that, or think they have a beat on them, would refrain from bombing.
I suppose the ifs on that are large, but ultimately it does feel like, from at least from the noise of Trump and his associates, is the leadership team around Trump, that they're kind of talking that down. This is done. We did an amazing job. Everything was blasted into smithereens and mission accomplished. That famous sign that George W. Bush put behind himself when he was announcing the success in the Iraq War, only for the next 10 years for the country to collapse in all sorts of quagmire. Matthew Wright, senior freight analyst at Kepler. Back to basics here, Matt. Are we seeing after somewhat accelerated, elevated, rapidly elevating tanker rates and others that were showing the great stress of this conflict of the last few weeks, are we seeing that return to normal?
Yeah, we are now. Yeah. It's starting to ease. Rates went up over 100% over that sort of week and a half period. But they're starting to decline. As of yesterday, we came down another sort of 20%. But there's still a way to go. I think compared with oil prices, freight has been comparatively elevated for a combination of reasons. I think, over that window where we had a lot of uncertainty, a lot of owners were sort of not unwilling, they were wary about entering the Strait, and there was still a lot of cargoes being moved. But what we saw was just a reduction in fixtures. So there's a bit of a makeup period going on now. We're seeing, we're counting transits of the Strait of Hormuz, and we are seeing now more VLCCs on the dirty side, on the crude side, and then more LRs on the clean tanker side moving in, compared with the last 2 weeks. So it is, the confidence is starting to rise in the region for sure.
And when you look at it wider, did we see those elevated rates and the stress in the shipping just related to this geography, i.e. the geography here of the Middle East Gulf region, Strait of Hormuz, the Red Sea, or did that extend China, Pacific routes to the US, or where did that emanate to across the world?
Yeah, it definitely did make its way out. It was all triggered by the situation there. But if you look in the Atlantic, we saw rates from West Africa, rates from the US, rates from Brazil, all of those big VL loading areas. They had to actually elevate rates to draw vessels because of the very, very high rates that were being bid out of the Mideast Gulf. A lot of tonnage, even amid the uncertainty, a lot of vessels were ballasting back from Asia in the direction of the Mideast Gulf. And so, under normal fundamentals, for the Atlantic Basin, if you need vessels in a month or so, you've got to start increasing your expectations there. So yeah, the rates there. And interestingly, yesterday, rates out of the US have sort of held their value more than they have out of the Mideast Gulf. And that's essentially just to sort of narrow that gap between those two load regions.
Laurie, looking ahead to the sort of outlook we're at the end of the first half, we've kind of got this very tumultuous conflict behind us. And in some ways, we don't have to, as you said, we avoided nuclear war, but even less than that, there's a sense of at least some clarity that we've seen. The steam has been let off here out of the valve, and there's an outlook for the second half that maybe is a bit clearer. OPEC Plus meets next week to decide what their policies will be towards supply. Your thoughts on the decision that they're facing? Is that simpler now? How do you see things?
Look, again, this morning there were news that Russia was saying if there needs to be a hike, we are okay with adding barrels. So I think going forward, people there will go back to the market and the fundamentals and see where we're heading with the world economy and what are the supply and the demand situation, and take action. So basically, before even the war, the announcement from OPEC, they will bring back the voluntary cuts that they made, I think helped as well, kind of in seeing how the market was not that much if you want, they were okay, if you want, about what was happening, and they didn't go crazy, and the prices didn't go as high as they should have been, especially when they were when there were threats that the the Strait of Hormuz will close, all of that, because basically under that the market was okay, and the fundamentals were okay, there were well supplied, and knowing
It was
that,
probably the biggest surprise of the last 2 weeks was how sober the oil markets were
yeah,
generally after a
they're
slight initial bump, 10%, but no 30,
they're becoming
40%.
they're becoming, I guess, understanding the geopolitics of the region, and knowing, I guess, no one from all the analysts that were on everywhere in public talking, they were saying that the Strait of Hormuz could be closed because it will definitely harm the Iranians, and then it will harm their relation with Asia, and knowing that anyway, Iran was one of these countries that they were saying that you should stop working with the West, with the Americans, with the Europeans, and you should go east for your economy, etc., and with all your relation partnerships to go east. So when you want to go east, I guess it means that you cannot close the Strait of Hormuz. I guess there is kind of this understanding and more understanding of the geopolitics and what is possible, what is not possible, what is behind the threats that go live. I guess this is where the traders have become really good. The markets have become more subtle in understanding these messages. And I guess, but the basics is before we go into the war, there were already injection of these cuts that they were coming back. And then already the market was okay. And then adding all these barrels, and that made it a bit that's why I guess the market were calmer. And then going forward, let's hope that there is no other surprise from now till the end of the year.
Well,
and
there's
focus on the
you
fundamentals
can
and
be
making the markets and the economies really.
you can be certain about that there's always a surprise around the corner, at least, or at least some dramatic headlines. Bill, next week, every sort of focus turns back to, obviously, as it does every day in some ways, to the Donald Trump show, and next week we have the demand, or the budget bill to reach its sort of climax of at least from Donald Trump's perspective, demanding that that passes. That has a number of pieces in it that could be quite disruptive. And then we also have the expiry of the 90-day pause in the Liberation Day tariffs that were announced on April 2nd. How do you see those two things playing out in the context of Washington?
Yeah, it's going to be a pretty crazy week in Washington as the Republican Senate tries to push through this budget bill. Seems unlikely to me they could get it done by the end of the week, but that's what Trump's demanding, and that's what they seem to be trying to do. Maybe they make it, maybe they don't. But that's, you're really seeing lots of tensions.
Is the budget debate in America sort of resonating through beyond the Beltway into Main Street, as they call it, in the sense of, can Trump drive through what seems to be, in a lot of ways, not quite a pro-Main Street budget?
Yeah, I think he'll get what he wants in the end. Can he get it this week? I don't think so, but perhaps even this week. I do think, ultimately, as the House fell in line, so will the Senate more or less fall into line. It's going to get messy. I doubt it'll fall apart in the end. I suppose it could. And then on the trade side, I think they're just trying to come up with a few wins, a few scores that they can announce before this 90-day deadline. They'll delay the other ones and present it as a lot of progress. And then meanwhile, I just think going back, I think, to the Gulf, I do think Lori's right in that there is a new template playing out in how these conflicts go. Whereas before, I think we always thought that energy supplies coming out of the Gulf and out of the Straits of Hormuz would be a major Iranian target. I don't think that's what anybody's thinking anymore. And I think that's partly why Trump's signaling to China, or signaling to Iran, that they can go ahead and sell their oil to China, because he's basically saying, we're not going to impose the sort of maximum pressure strategy we had last time that shut off your oil supplies and gave you no incentive to keep the straits open. I think now they're signaling that we want you to keep the straits open, and if you do, go right ahead and keep selling your oil. Iran needs that oil. And so I do think you'll get a little bit of a calmer landscape, calmer in quotes,
well,
going forward.
There's certainly a new dimension in the context of all of the actors. When you think of the China piece, obviously the Iranian oil goes to China. China brokered the Saudi-Iranian rapprochement, which is sort of really in some ways feels like the foundation stone of everything in the neighborhood now. Matt, just looking at that from the perspective of the infamous Dark Fleet, the sanctions both on Russia, still there, obviously the oil price cap, etc., and the sanctions on Iran and the movement of that. And where are we seeing the Dark Fleet, the Gray Fleet, and the stress in those spaces? Is that telling us anything?
Well, I mean, Trump's tweet was certainly interesting, because it's a sort of de facto agreement. You can carry on doing what we technically are sanctioning you for doing. This is not a sanctions waiver. Nothing has changed from a policy point of view, but he's kind of
because insurance companies can't go and bank that, can they?
Exactly. He's killing two birds with one stone, because with one hand, he's sort of de-escalating and sort of giving Iran something, which is very, very important to their economy, an incentive for them to stop attacking Israel. And then on the second time, he's bringing down the flat price, which is obviously incredibly important for him domestically. So very, 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 very savvy on that point. Whether it works or not is another matter. With regards to the fleet, essentially these are still sanctioned trades, and as a result, you're going to continue to have to see the same method of transport, which is vessels that are either directly sanctioned by OFAC in the US, or vessels that are operating under relatively shady ownership, as we've said, the Dark Fleet. What will be interesting now following this is, we had at the end of the Biden presidency, we had 180 ships sanctioned related to Russian trade. We had expected the US administration to, under the maximum pressure approach, to do something similar to sanction more vessels in relation to Iran. That is looking increasingly unlikely. So what does that mean? That means that these vessels are now are we saying that the US is accepting them? You know, I would argue this is a bit of a dangerous precedent to go down, because these vessels are not vessels that you want to be operating commercially. You bring them into the commercial fleet or have them removed entirely. This sort of midway is less than ideal. And with regards to sort of the grey fleet, which is the vessels more in relation to Russia, you know, the EU is attempting to push the price cap down to $45 a barrel. It's not looking particularly likely now. I think we're going to have a couple of countries in the EU. It requires unanimous consent, and that's not looking necessarily likely now. But essentially, that would have a very similar effect. You know, we're very far away, even with discounts, from $45 a barrel Urals. So we'll just end up with more ships incentivized to move into this trade at a later date.
Let's go to the survey question and get some sort of outlook here. Brent averaged about $70 in the first half of 2025. What will it average in the second half? Closer to 50, closer to 60, closer to 70, closer to 80. Just about say what it'll average tomorrow, never mind the first half. But I suppose despite all of the drama, prices, as we've talked, have been relatively sedated. And as one looks to the second half, I think one has to think about these things in a fairly basic fundamental sort of way, putting aside all of the noise. What's supply and demand look like? The good old-fashioned basics that underpin the oil price. Is China going to have a good demand period? Is OPEC Plus going to continue to accelerate their supply increases while demand is a little bit uncertain? So those are, I think, are the fundamentals that one has to base a judgment on. It seems this oil market still wants to go down when the geopolitical stress is not there, as we've seen in the last 2 weeks, up $10, down nearly $10 again, but sort of holding with this uncertainty creeping in. Is this a ceasefire? Is this a pause? Or is this an end? And I think the market seems a little uncertain about that. Does the risk to supply continue to be present in the Gulf? So choose your number there, boys and girls, 50, 60, 70, or 80, because Laurie is going to explain to us how we should have answered in the sense that I wanted to get your thoughts, Laurie, on a slightly pull back the lens here. Obviously, the Iran-Israel conflict grabs all the headlines, but meanwhile, Israel is still bombing Lebanon most days. It's slaughtering indiscriminately and to horrific levels every day in Gaza. Never mind starvation and every possible abhorrent act. It's unbelievable to think that a country that's called a democracy and civilized and all of that language would be conducting this with the quiet consent of the West. It's so embarrassing on so many deep levels. But nonetheless, pulling all of those things together, Laurie, is the region, is this ceasefire in Iran, Israel, a indication of that we can find somehow resolution in the West Bank and Gaza, or does it have? Is it completely or the opposite? Israel acts continuously with impunity and has one mission in mind: clear the Palestinians out of Palestine.
First of all, let's say that in a way, it was good that Iran and Israel fought directly, because I guess like for years, this was like a indirect, if you want, war between both. And then now they know each other, what's their potential and what they can do to each other. So that's one thing. Maybe now it's not all about I threaten you to do this, I threaten you to do that. They know exactly what they can do to each other, and that will be very important to sober up and to know that what are the possibilities and limitations of each of the countries. That's one thing. Second, I guess that could mean the end of the proxies and the end of the proxy wars. And now that they dared and went to the direct war. And that would mean so then the other point would be, again, for Israel to really think about its relation with Palestinians. And then we go back to that point, wherever they go, whatever they do, the Israelis, even if they did this whole war with Iran, they end up to the situation where they have to deal with the biggest fear of them, which is Palestine, and what to do with the Palestinians. Again, there are like many views about like the future of Palestinians with the Israelis. Some are saying that maybe we should get over the two-state solution and just keep on repeating the two-state solution is not conducive to a solution. Let's sit and think about other creative ways. And I've been hearing many Palestinians I talk to, like they do have a certain understanding of what they want the future to look like. And then I think these voices need to come back about like alternatives. And then basically, I guess the other point will be like, so now do we resume back to the idea of, okay, how to solve the Palestinian and Israeli relation and think again about the normalization in the region and about Saudi Arabia and Iran and Saudi Arabia and Israel. Are we going to that path? Again, that is not clear today. Like we're still, everyone is still looking at, okay, what happened in this 12-day war? What are the implications?
So there's really no indication ultimately that the sort of ceasefire this week on Iran and Israel brings us any closer to resolution in Palestine, any sort of a pause to the crisis in Gaza. Nothing's changed really.
No, the only thing that I can say is like maybe the attention is going to go back to Gaza, because definitely while Iran, Israel were at the front page, there were like life was really like they were miseries happening on the other side. But just to say that maybe with this situation, maybe Qatar's role has maybe a bit advanced after they accepted to take the hit to end the war between Israel and Iran, and it was chosen that the attacks will be on Qatari soils. We would have thought when we were thinking about like where would they hit, first came in mind was Iraq, right? So at least like me and others that we were doing all these daily mental exercise, we didn't think that Qatar will be brave enough to take the hits. But like now you're elevating the role of Qatar in the region as playing an advanced role. Will they use?
Well, it's an interesting thing when you put it like that. Agreed to take the hit is sort of like put up your hands. Who wants to play here? Bill, your thoughts on running out of time a little bit, but in terms of where Trump goes here from the point of view, he's come out of NATO meeting now. He obviously, whether the ceasefire holds is one thing, but ultimately seems to be a success for him. All the praise from the NATO allies, now 5% on the NATO commitments. Is it too much to say that he's riding high, at least internationally at the moment? How do you see his posture and his ability to enforce his writ?
Yeah, I think he's scored some real tactical wins here, and he's looking, I think he's feeling quite good about those, just as the Israelis have had some real tactical wins over the last year, including in the last week. However, neither of those solves the longer term problems. You've still got a long-term issue of what to do about the Palestinian people. You've still got a long-term issue about Iran's enrichment program. Any Iranian regime, even under a full regime change scenario, is going to demand the right to enrich its own uranium, at least over the long haul. That issue remains entirely unresolved. So, tactically, yeah, they're all looking good at the moment. But as you look out over a year, 2 years, 5 years, it's hard to see these issues not festering and becoming, flaring up yet again.
Matt, just looking forward into the second half of the year, and of course, as we say, the oil price, a lot of it on the fundamentals will be determined by the health of China. and with that, the trade war will determine in some ways the health of China. Are we seeing after the first half with the huge disruption in the U.S.-China trade? At some point, there was literally no ships, container ships going across the Pacific for a few weeks. How does that look now going, the outlook for that, the rates on that? What is the most, I think the busiest container rate in the world across the Pacific from China to the US West Coast? Does that tell us anything about the health or the outlook for the Chinese economy?
I think I think it's still a bit early to say. I think that it's much improved, but I think the next couple of weeks will be really important because I think everybody will be focusing on that US-China trade deal, exactly whether what goes forward. Outside of commodities is almost more important, just on the raw, on the, the finished products, as you say, that's what's going to keep people engaged in this. I think both sides are going to be pretty savvy about this. I think people are going to realize that, whether you look at China as a sort of diminishing force in terms of growth, it is still absolutely enormous in terms of its impact globally and will continue to be both on the consumption of raw materials and as a huge exporter of finished products. And I think the US is gonna it realizes that and is going to look to negotiate something that suits both sides, I think.
Just to quick follow up on that, are we seeing the emergence of any other trade routes, any other shipping routes that would indicate a move away from the US, a move away from these established long-term supply chain routes that one would be paying attention to?
Not hugely. I mean, if there are, it's going to be from elsewhere in Asia. China has already offshored a huge amount of manufacturing. Not offshored, I'd say it has been stolen by the likes of Vietnam and other places, in terms of, but I think that stuff takes a long time to percolate through. So not yet.
Okay, well, we'll wrap it up there. Brent crude oil averaging in the second half of the year, $60 getting more votes than $70, but and $80 a little bit, but nobody's on 50. So I think that's a shift from the last time we asked that question. Definitely the answers were a little bit more bearish. Now the answers are looking a little bit more bullish, at least in this room. Let's see if that is correlated into public posting on social and other votes on that. We'll wrap it up there. Thank you so much, Bill Spindle from New York or Washington, Bill, today. It's or maybe it's India. I'm not sure. You could be anywhere, really.
Actually, in Europe at the moment.
Oh, you're in Europe. Okay. And Laurie Attain also in Europe and Belgium, and Matt. It's the European panel this morning. Matt in London. So thanks, everybody. Have a great weekend. We're off tomorrow because of the Islamic New Year holiday here in the Middle East, and we'll be back on Monday. All the best. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.